Welcome to the Future of Work Live. Hosted by Mark Salisbury, author of the new book, Socrates Digital for Learning and Problem Solving. Each 25-minute episode with Mark and his guests prepares you for the upcoming new world of work.
Welcome to the Future of Work Live. Our guest today is Kevin Brady. So let's go ahead and get right to it and welcome Kevin to the show.
Hi, Mark. Thanks. Nice to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. And here's the thing for our people who don't recognize Kevin immediately, because I know sometimes that, you're out in the public and people don't recognize you. And so Kevin was an adult education instructor for over 20 years and later studied the links between learning and technology in graduate school. He earned a PhD at the University of New Mexico in 2007. He retired in 2015. So Kevin, welcome to the show. And I think the very first thing that I want to ask you is this, but first we got to get this little title up here so people can see. Kevin Brady retired, still plays the guitar, and quite well, what I understand.
Thank you.
And so here's my question to you, but I want to preface it with this question. What I remember, your PhD was around the history of instructional technology. Is that right? Did I remember that correctly?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Okay. So my question to you would be then, what can the past tell us about the future?
Well, I think that it tells us a couple of different things. First off, it could help us keep from reinventing the wheel over and over again, because a lot of the questions that come up in the study of technology and how to use it have been considered for a long time. People have tried to find answers. Some have worked and some haven't. It tells us a lot about the interactions between the technology and the society. Early on, when Patrick Suppies was at Stanford University and he was trying to deliver instruction with computers at a distance, the whole project depended on using phone lines and telecommunications equipment that didn't exist for the most part. So it kind of helps spur the development of these kinds of systems. And then finally, I think the one thing that history in general always teaches us about is about human nature, And one of the things that you notice as you look at technology and learning is that oftentimes the original claims made for what technology can do are a little bit exaggerated. In the early 1960s, as Patrick Suppies was developing his programs at Stanford, he had partnered with IBM and with the federal government. He told Scientific American that he was going to give every kid in America a tutor as good as Alexander the Great had. And Aristotle was Alexander the Great's tutor. And things didn't work out quite that way, but, they learned a lot. And here we are, 60 years later, some of Suppies' programs are still being used at Stanford University today.
Oh, man. Now, I've tried to steal some of that thunder myself. I am coming out with a brand new book here pretty soon, and it's called Socrates Digital for Learning and Problem Solving. So I'm trying to grab that. It's the smartest Socrates, right?
Right.
And put that out too. So it's not, I thought it was a brand new idea, but apparently it's not. And so a lot of the stuff Suppies did, I guess, is not really, I'm still doing that kind of stuff today, as far as I can tell.
It is. Suppies had borrowed ideas about the psychology of learning from the behaviorists. And so what his programs tried to do was pose a problem to the student. Then the student tries to answer the problem. And then in its most sophisticated version, the computer would respond to what the student said. And if there was a problem, the program was supposed to sort of give the student hints and help them solve it. And if the student got the problem right away, then the program says, "Great, you're doing really good," and moves them on to the next problem, and hopefully slowly moves the student through the material. It worked really well with things like mathematics and logic that are very structured. It didn't work quite so well with things that are ill-structured, the ill-structured domains, say like literacy or writing. So, and it was also limited by the limitations on the computers of that time. How much they could actually do back then.
Okay. And that brings us to, the title of the show is The Future of Work Live. And so what are the links between work and this historical view of learning?
Well, I think we haven't always appreciated it, but the workplace is the site of a lot of learning, very considerable amount of learning. Up as late as 1940, most Americans only had an eighth grade education. So a lot of what people learned, they learned on the job in the course of an apprenticeship or just the experiences they would gain on the job. And I think that's still especially true today, especially as technology is developing rapidly and the context of work changes very quickly. Then that puts a burden on people to adapt quickly and to learn new things on a regular basis. And one of the things we know about human learning is that a lot of times, given the choice between, say, going to a textbook or a program or asking the guy down the hall how to do something,
Yeah.
people go and ask the guy down the hall.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, this was something our good friend John Seely Brown did a lot of work with when he was at Xerox PARC. The Sociology of Learning in the Workplace. He has that wonderful book, The Social Life of Information, that talks about this. And so, I think the workplace is the site of a lot of learning. And I think actually what goes on a lot in the schools is to get you ready to do that once you're at actually in the work environment.
Yeah. Yeah. I always liked John Seely Brown. And what I liked about him, he was trained as a computer scientist, but
Yes.
yet he realized that technology doesn't solve all problems and, in fact, sometimes gets in the way.
Yeah.
And so he originally thought of the Eureka, right? A very smart artificial intelligence program was going to help the people repair Xerox copiers, but
That's
found out later that maybe just connecting people with walkie-talkies would work better.
It did. And one of the things he found out along the way was that the culture in which people are living and working made a big difference. In
Yeah.
France, the repairmen got together and talked to each other a lot. In
Yeah.
England, they didn't do that very much. And in the United States, it was often a competitive environment. So if a guy knew something special, he didn't necessarily want to share it with everybody else.
Yeah, we're that way, aren't we? Though, yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've got to get to this one next. This question is so. Given this, and we already introduced John Seely Brown's idea of Eureka, which was an artificial intelligence program that would help solve fixing these Xerox machines. But how does AI affect learning at work, would you say?
Well, I think we're still in the early stages of figuring that out. Since the late 1960s, we've had expert systems available in the workplace and to help with a lot of people. And that is, I think, a form of AI. That a lot of that comes out of the work of Simon and Newell at Carnegie, at the Carnegie Mellon Institute. And so I think that it also, as with, say, knowledge management systems, it offers an opportunity where we can maybe store what we've already learned. So that you can, if you've got some sort of a smart engine that allows you to query a strong database, then you can go in and you can see, well, has this problem happened before? How do people solve it? That might lead you then to another set of ideas that will help you deal with the problem you're facing. Another thing I think it can do is it can help you find relevant examples. And I'm thinking here of what John Seely Brown was doing with surfers and YouTube. Seely Brown noticed that these extreme surfers all around the world would shoot themselves, videotape themselves doing tricks, and put it on YouTube. And within weeks, people were duplicating that all around the globe.
And many other very smart things.
Yeah, and so I can see that AI building on top of this. So that a story I like to tell is I knew some guys in Virginia who all worked in a company that recycled pallets, and anytime they had to do a repair job, they videotaped themselves doing it, They use, well, not tape, they use their phones to record themselves doing the job, explaining what they were doing, and then they posted it to the company's intranet, and it was in this searchable database. And so if you had a smart search engine that would help you find these things, even though you're in an entirely different plant, but maybe a year later, you could find an example of people solving the same problem that you were facing. So I always thought that was a really kind of a smart use. I think.
Oh yeah, yeah. And the program that and I know you know about this, so I can just bring it up, is started all that expert systems kind of rush in the 80s was came out of the myosin program at Stanford, which is
Mhm.
an expert system. And
Right.
for that one, myosin was trying to diagnose infectious diseases that are bacterial and based in a hospital setting.
Yeah.
And so that just completely at the time, people said, well, this is where we're going. This is the way we're going to actually do it. These smart machines are going to figure things out for us. So, what happened along the way?
Well, oh, so on some things the machines turned out to be really smart, and on some others, it they made a good stab at it. But there was this: the machine has a sort of logic to it. It has a big database. It doesn't necessarily have experience. And
Yeah.
a lot of times I think so. If you've got a clinician in that case, someone who's been dealing with patients for 10, 15 years, they might be a little tricked by something. And so then the AI becomes their assistant, which I think is a very fruitful use of it. Uh,
Yeah.
because there's always going to be those what would I call it? The individuality to the experiences and so forth. Little things that maybe don't fit within the context of a computerized database that a human being recognizes. That maybe the machine doesn't. And if the machine is programmed in a certain way, then it can also learn from that experience, which we hope it will do. And so then the experienced human passes some of that experience onto the program, and it's maybe available then for the next person who comes along with a similar problem. So
Yeah. What you're
that's
describing is how we learn in the workforce. That brings us to the question then is so what have we learned about the very nature of learning by working with these intelligent machines?
sure. Yeah. Going all the way back to Simon and Newell in the 1950s, they came into this with these ideas from psychology, and they thought the human problem solving was logical and that it was a sort of a step by step process. And as they tried to implement this, they found, well, it worked well for solving geometry problems and it worked for some kinds of chess problems. But when they began to compare what a chess master does with what the program does, they realized the importance of experience. And that's one of these
Yeah.
things that's going to lead to those expert systems over time. And so, and that work got built on all through the 70s and into the 80s, right up to today, where I think the behaviorist ideas about learning and about the structure of thought gradually got blended together with what's called cognitivism, which came out of the work of many different psychologists, but in particular out of the work of Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist who studied how children learn. And what he noticed is that they learned by playing, by doing, and by interacting with each other. Okay. And so I think you then begin to combine that with some of the behaviorist ideas about uh, uh, benefits and rewards in the learning process and step by step. And some of the things that others have learned about our willingness to learn certain things at certain points. We're
Hmm.
not always ready to learn maybe at that moment. We see it very clearly with kids where at the age of 3, they are ready to learn one thing. At the age of 10, they're ready to learn a lot more. I think that's also true of adults. Sometimes, maybe if what we're doing is working for us, then we're fine. But it's
Yeah.
when that begins to break down that maybe then we're willing to begin to learn something new.
Well, I think I'm approaching wanting to be close to learning something as a 3-year-old now. Well, here's the thing I've been thinking about too, and it goes with my new book. It's hard for me to get off of it because I just finished it, but it's about Socrates digital, and it's helping us problem solve. So it plays the role of Socrates. But if you remember, Socrates helps us learn, right? And so by asking the right questions. And so ultimately, the learning resides in us in some ways. And so that was kind of my new twist on this. But it really strikes me that we can now start to look at environments where we are people and machines, and we are kind of learning together in some ways. And so does that strike a chord with you? Do you see that trend?
Yeah, I do. I think that's a blending of these two ideas. When a lot of the work about the social nature of learning was coming out in the 1980s, Herbert Simon, who Nobel Prize winner and one of the great pioneers in this whole area here,
In economics, I might add too.
economics, cognitive psychology,
Yeah.
yep, and organizational behavior. He was very skeptical. He said in one article that learning takes place inside the mind of the learner. But then the social learning people pointed out that what you learn, how you learn it, when and where you learn it is all heavily dependent on the social environment. And
Yeah.
so for us, a big part of that social environment is structured at work. And, I know I've experienced work environments that were not conducive to learning. And I'm sure a lot of us have.
Yes, I'm
And
I'm sure we have. Yes.
yeah, and when you do have a social environment that's conducive to learning, my experience of it was that it's a lot of fun. You look forward to going to work because
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting, and there's going to be a nice ending to the day. Let's say,
Yeah.
and minimizes your frustration, and gives you a sense of accomplishment at the same time. I think, and so I think that's the point where it'll depend on how these programs are structured to interact with people and what their role is in the context of the work environment. So I think that's a set of challenges yet to be met in a lot of work environments these days.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I like this next question here because there's a lot of interesting things here I know that go with this. So, what are the links between AI and the study of learning?
Ah, well, since both psychologists and early computer scientists decided that learning was a essential aspect of human psychology, they regularly tried to use the computer to understand how learning took place. So they had ideas about it learning, they test them with the computer and see whether or not it worked. And
Yeah.
then, so there's this back and forth that went on, and I think still goes on today, where I, you have folks trying to get down to the nitty gritties. It starts off with things like the programs that wanted to learn to recognize speech. What
Yeah.
was the fella's name that we met? Roger Schenk.
Oh, Roger Shank. Yeah.
Yeah, and he started off with trying to get voice recognition, speech recognition out of programs, and then that led him into a whole other series of ideas about how we learn. And his students, of course, have been very influential in developing both voice recognition software and AI software, expertise software. So I think it's this constant back and forth, and I haven't kept up with it as much as when I was still working, but I think that it's a sort of a continuous process where, in
Yeah.
order to try and make a machine that interacts with people, think of these attempts to create robotic machines,
Yeah.
that actually interface with people, and it's big in Japan, for instance. Well, then you have to understand, well, how do humans react to certain tones of voice? How do we react to certain facial expressions? How do we react to certain kinds of language? And so all of
Mm.
these things, I think, there's this back and forth between them. And Rodney Brooks, there's a great little documentary movie called Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control. And a third of it is about Rodney Brooks' laboratory, where they have a robot that they've trained it to go around and collect empty soda pop cans. but it had to learn to stay out of people's ways and not trip and tell the difference between a full can and an empty can, all this kind of stuff here. And so then it had to learn. And so that led them to think about, well, how does a human learn to do these things?
Yes.
So that's the kind of interaction I'm thinking of.
And then how do we learn together and all those kinds of things? And one of the things you said earlier, which I thought was really interesting, is you said, and we tended to make big claims about what these programs were doing. And it made me think about a program created by Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT called ELIZA.
Yes.
And ELIZA actually was presented as a therapist. And Weizenbaum, as I understand it, actually made it as a joke. He wanted to make this little program, and it understood some natural language where people would type in. And he put it out there for some of his friends and their families to kind of use. And what happened is people started sharing their deepest secrets with this computer program. And Weizenbaum actually was very disappointed in people that they couldn't tell the difference. And so to celebrate that moment, right, is that I pulled up an ELIZA program from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, which people can find here. And I've got it pulled up right now. And I thought you could just give me a question you would like. And it calls itself, "Hello, I'm ELIZA. I'll be your therapist." So, Kevin, what would you like to ask ELIZA right now?
ELIZA, how are you feeling today?
How are you feeling today? Okay. And we'll hit a return there. And the response is, "Why are you interested in whether or not I am feeling today?" So,
well, ELIZA, I care about you.
Okay, let's try that one. I care about you. Okay. And we'll see that. And then ELIZA comes back and says, "Hey, we were discussing you, not me." So, and what Weizenbaum did is he did what's called just a surface kind of thing, looking for certain keywords and then generating a response.
Yeah.
And I feel that sometimes we're still there treading water a little bit with that, and we haven't got as deep a meaning as we'd like to with that.
I would also suggest that part of what Weizenbaum did there is he had a script, as Shank would call it, a preconceived notion of how the therapist interacts with the patient.
Yes.
So then that gets embodied in the program that he made. And I think that that's true of almost all the computer programs that we make. We have a concept.
Well, it's true of Socrates. It's true of Socrates Digital. When I wrote the book, I went and got an expert on Socratic questioning. They categorized all the questions and how they follow each other. And that's what it does. And the point of it is people to go down that process of reasoning that way, and responding to those questions and being more thorough. And so, but you're right, it's the same thing, and it's 70 years later, whatever it is, and we're still kind of doing the same thing. Okay, I want to go to the takeaway because we've been talking for a year. And so the takeaway here is, as I see it, is on the job and off the job learning will be permanent features of working. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think a part of it is at an individual level, we're all of us going to be constantly presented with these changing situations at work, new technologies, new relationships between organizations. And so it's going to call on all the people in the work environment to constantly be adapting to these changes. And that adaptation is learning. And then in a larger sense, at the organizational level, how does the organization cope with both the external environment and its internal environment? And in order to do that, it too has to adapt and learn. It has to pay attention to both the internal and external environment and be willing to change when change is called for. And, you read the newspapers on a regular basis, we've got the necessity for change staring us in the face on so many different topics. Yeah,
we certainly do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, I want to thank you for being on our show today. I want to remind people that our next episode is going to be next Wednesday at 1 o'clock Central Time. And here's where I cue up the ending so that we actually come in on time. So thanks again, Kevin, for being with us today. And we'll see you around.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
The Future of Work Live is also available as a podcast. You can find it at www.marksalisbury.com, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.